The Flames. History's greatest secret and key to a future where ships travel lifetimes to bring flames to new worlds. Those who dare to walk the fire can cross between the stars with a step if you can find a ferryman and pay your way across. For most who brave the flame alone are lost forever. May the ferryman take you. Crucible and Flame. Written and narrated by John Miro. 3. The ferryman endured a lesson in the size of generation ships on the walk back to Ship 227's church. The thrice-damned thing was farther astern than the flame the ferryman had journeyed here through. The armored guards before and ahead had enough training not to flinch when he shouted profanities, but the half-dozen youths, in their least-patched Sunday bests, jumped and turned every time. He didn't care. Both his heels were well and truly blistered, and with every wincing step the echo of his past grew louder. He shrugged away the pain and the fear, and he stoked his anger higher to drown out the memories. How dare that Gollivin Corp flunky treat him like a common servant? The insect was completely dependent on him. Without him to guide the way to this backwater coasting between the stars, the Legal could have ended up on a dead world, or a plague ship, or, the ferryman daydreamed, he could have walked out below sea level, or into an active volcano. The ferryman coaxed a smile onto his face as he distracted himself with how best to wipe away the superior smile Critchlow was sure to be wearing, fresh from dominating the business leaders of Ship 227 in the coming contract negotiations. Drop the worm on the southern continent of Hunter's Paradise and give the little shit a little wave goodbye as saber-toothed tigers circled around him? On second thought, the ferryman chuckled. It was doubtful even those monsters would digest a Legal. The smile left his face as the fantasy evaporated. He could milk Gollivin for billions for the Legal's insults, but if he failed to honor his crossing, the Corp would see to it that word spread. And who would trust their lives to a ferryman who broke trust on a crossing? He was one in billions, the rarest of beings in the universe, a man who could walk the fire anywhere he wished. He was 700 years old, all but immortal, and the truly closest thing to a god there was, regardless of what his silly church preached to its herd. For his services, the Gollivin corporate paid more money than most worlds or ships possessed. That their ambassador, Legal Critchlow, would just toss him his case? Did that little runt think he could treat a ferryman like a subclass servant? Yes, that's exactly what the Legal thought. Humanity's trillions might cover thousands of worlds, millions of space habs and generation ships, and all were dependent on mere hundreds of ferrymen. But there were only a handful of corporates as large as Gollivin. The truly rich were rarer still than even the ferryman. His face reddened, and he pulled down the old brown ferryman's cloak the church tender had given him, covering his face again. It felt as if the black tattoos on his face were glowing for all to see, and glowing brighter as his humiliation burned deeper. He would have his contract renegotiated. He would demand cities in his name, a continent, no, an entire planet. He would make Gollivin Corp drag this Legal before him, to bow low, to beg his forgiveness. And Critchlow would do it, say whatever he was told, because words were nothing to a Legal but tools. He may even act contrite in all their future dealings, but it would be a hollow act. And on every crossing after, he would walk ahead to his comfort and depredations just the same, as the ferryman walked to wherever. He felt the roughness of the dirt-encrusted clothes sheathing him harder to ignore, the emptiness again in his belly, the ache in his undernourished bones that hollowed him after every crossing. His anger faded as the sting of his past grew again. Why was it so important that the fineries he hoped for were waiting for him at the church? Because the clothes would hide his own unimportance from himself. He laughed out loud, hysterical braying. Several of the young servants escorting him jumped again. Unimportant, he raged inside his skull. I am a ferryman. A craving for the shining faces of the faithful seized him harder than the pain or rage or hunger. None of that mattered. He would gorge on the glowing eyes of the church faithful who so loved the ferryman. He banished the escort before the last airlock into the commons. They wanted to argue, all questioning looks and licking lips, but backed away with their heads bowed low at once when he waved his hand. Something in him fed on that frightened obedience. Something else inside mocked that the great ferryman needed to look so low to raise himself up. He threw his hood off, unclasped the cloak, and folded it behind his back. He triggered the airlock and sauntered through. The gravity wobbled as he crossed through the massive double doors of the airlock chamber. He felt his stomach roll as he passed between two poorly calibrated gravity fields. It had to be 100 years since he'd been last aboard a ship with multiple gravity generators. For centuries now, one generator could push proper gravity all across a ship miles long. He wondered if the legal would screw 227 so bad in the negotiation that even this crew's grandkids would need space sickness meds. The ripple of nausea passed, and he continued on into the common. All generation ships had commons, places where trade and sport and recreation could take whatever form desired by the masses who kept the ship working. This space was even larger than the warehouse where the Flame lived, but here it was bright, cheerfully colored. 3 metal tree-shaped sculptures were spaced 20 meters apart to the sides and in front of the airlock doors. Hundreds of real plants rose from tiered pots across each. The air was richer here, thanks to the chlorophyll in hundreds of oxygen-generating plants on the trees, the many hydroponic walls and hedges separating areas of the large space, and also from the not unpleasant reek of animal dung. There was a wind-generating platform in here, too, bringing a jumble of scents to him on a gentle breeze. Food cooking, algae from water filtration, pollen from plants all covered the inevitable machine smells of life aboard ship. He crossed between the trees, climbed a large bridge, rusted in parts, repainted festively in others, over a lily-padded water tank. Like everything on the generation ships, it had several purposes, feigning nature and beauty being just one of them. He nodded to 2 women passing by. They didn't connect him to the Flame, just smiled politely as they walked by. There were thousands of souls on this ship. Not every face could be known. But who on board would look like him? He fought the urge to turn away, daring them to see his face, show some of the discomfort he fought in himself. But the hens didn't give whisper to any suspicion as they passed, didn't avert their eyes if they did catch the mark on his face. He leaned over a freshly painted segment of the bridge railing and stared down, waiting for the redness on his face to fade. Again he rubbed his knuckles over the tattooed numbers on his cheek. His past was hitting him so hard on this crossing. Damn you, Critchlow! He looked into the water, catching irregular objects deep below. Then he made out the piping running between them and knew they were cases of algae, wrapped inside layers of filtration. Nothing on this ship could exist purely for beauty's sake. It had to earn its existence, had to do something to help nudge the ship closer to its goal. Orestes 227, a planet in the Straya cluster, now only 30 years distant. Orange and yellow shapes darted past beneath the water, fish swimming past. He smiled. That was a good touch, he thought. The storming in his head rolled back as water lapped at the columns under the bridge. The scent of spices and cooking reached him, and laughter followed the scents on the wind. He thought about following the sound, but then he shifted his weight, and the blistered skin of his heel tore. Growling, he pushed off the railing to find the damn church. He walked avenues defined by hedges, past hilly mounds where barefooted, bare-chested children played 5-ball, shouting out plays like they're heroes in the adult 10-ball leagues. He passed sculptures of tubing and mesh bearing the names of the departed etched onto metal imitations of suns or flames or drops of water. He hurried past a wash-house where two men were laughing and wrestling in a puddle of mud outside the doors, and a small crowd sprayed them with water and cheered them on. Tired now, he was almost grateful to be ignored, at least until he could reach the haven of the church. Once rested and fed, perhaps he would let the congregation sing for him, or even touch his grace. He might even take a woman to bed. He was sure many would vie to take in his grace that way too. That desire soured as he remembered the legal's words. The girls will be fresh and green. The legal's urges turned the ferryman's stomach. He limped down several more hedge alleys. Finally, he stumbled upon the common's center. It was divided into 4 smaller squares, each with different colored patio stones, wooden benches, and low hedges surrounding each. In the middle rose a statue, even higher than the metal trees at the airlock. The statue was of a flame, naturally, and half a ferryman stepping in, holding the hands of 3 children, dancing carefree into the flames behind him. He wondered, for perhaps the 10,000th time, why none of the tributes to his kind ever showed them bringing people out of the flame. Then he remembered where he was, and what the flames meant to people with little to no hope of changing their station in life. Escape. That was the whole idea with faith, that someone would come and take you to someplace better if you worked hard enough, if you were good enough. So foolish. "You're him," gasped a haggard woman to the ferryman's left. She fell to her knees, pulling her face into his cloak and weeping. "Bless you, ferryman." Other voices joined the old woman's. More hands touched him, praised him, thanked one god or another for him. The masses passed on his presence with more shouts, and soon the masses were all streaming toward him, except a few boys on the far side of the square, who were running away from him, toward plain wooden double doors, propped wide. The tender, wearing just a simple vest and white shirt, sleeves rolled up, stepped into the doorway, cleaning his hands with a rag. His eyebrows lifted in surprise, and he smiled kindly at the shipfolk tugging at him, laughing kindly as they pulled him out into the square. He met the ferryman's gaze and nodded, welcoming. More hands reached out and grasped his cloak, some even tugging on the patched jumpsuit beneath. The masses saw their shepherd coming and melted out of his way. Then the voices carried again, and the ferryman found his way clear too. They met in the middle of the square beneath the statue. They loved him, or bowed to him out of fear or need, but none shied away. All pressed forward. No, he admitted to himself and swallowed hard. The ferryman didn't love him. They didn't hate him. They didn't know him. They ached for what he could give them, which was more than he could say for them, he discovered, feeling hollower than ever, even in their storm of adulation. "Stop!" he cried. Then he shouted the word louder. The crowd pressed closer, wanting, heedless. Fear twisted an angry snarl off his face. He shuddered, remembering the last time he'd been choked in a sea of bodies. He didn't want their filthy hands on him, didn't care about what they needed to make their short lives better. He just wanted... What? "My wife, sir. Take me to my wife." "Please, ferryman, my children need medicine." "I will be whatever you need. Please take me with you." The ferryman stared up at the statue, suddenly numb and weak. His eyes began to ache, and moisture threatened to spill out. He didn't feel it when the press of bodies disappeared, when the roar was muted. Stunned, the ferryman watched the little tender wave kindly, and the crowd melted away. The wails melted away too, into murmurs and choked-off sobs. He didn't feel the hand gently pulling his elbow and triggering his feet into stumbling past the statue toward the old wooden doors beyond. He couldn't make sense of the gentle words the tender spoke as he put an arm across his shoulder and guided him inside the church. Walk the Fire by John Miro. Learn more at servingworlds.com. Theme music, Full On by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Many of the stories you listen to at servingworlds.com were made possible by the support of patrons at patreon.com/servingworlds. If you like what you hear, please consider adding your support. Thank you for listening.